Hello, I'm Philip Chase. Welcome to my YouTube channel on the best of fantasy. Today I will be reviewing The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski and translated by Danusia Stock. This is the first, chronologically speaking, first of the two short story collections in the Witcher series. It is not part of the Witcher saga proper, but it is an important read to prepare for the Witcher saga, in that these short stories give us some important background information on some of the main characters that will appear later on in the series. And I'm very grateful to my viewers who urged me to read the short story collection before embarking on the saga proper, because I can see where the value is in getting to know some important things about these characters. Now, there are 6 short stories in here, and they are surrounded by a frame narrative. The frame narrative is titled The Voice of Reason. And in here, the main character, Geralt, is recovering from a wound that he receives during one of the other short stories. In other words, the other short stories are all flashbacks that recount various moments in the life of Geralt. And in the present of the story, in the frame narrative, The Voice of Reason, he's recovering from his wound at the Temple of Melitele under the administrations of Mother Neneke. We also meet some other characters during the frame narrative, like Iola, and Dandelion shows up, and we also witness some of the prejudices that Geralt, as a witcher, suffers in society. The first of the actual short stories is The Witcher, in which we meet King Foltest, whose daughter is the product of an incestuous union and is thus a striga, type of monster from Slavic folklore. In the next short story, A Grain of Truth, we're introduced to a different version of the Beauty and the Beast story. And in The Lesser Evil, we find out why Geralt earned the nickname the Butcher of Blaviken. And we're also introduced to a kind of different take on the Snow White and Seven Dwarfs story. And we meet a very interesting character in Renfrey. I should also mention that this particular story, A Grain of Truth, contains references to rape and sexual exploitation, so be aware of that. In A Question of Price, we meet Queen Calinth, as well as her daughter Pavetta and her lover Dunny. And this particular short story features the law of surprise, something else that is borrowed from folklore and appears in stories like Rumpelstiltskin, for example. And incidentally, although she does not appear in any of these short stories, the character Ciri, her background story is explained in this particular short story. In The Edge of the World, we meet Dandelion, who is one of the great characters in here. Has a great, interesting relationship with the Witcher, with Geralt. Dandelion is a poet and a bard of sorts. We also meet another one of my favorite characters in here, the Sylvan named Torque. And we also get Sapkowski's take on elves, which I think is kind of interesting. And finally, in the title story, The Last Wish, we meet the sorceress Yennefer. So this is obviously a very important story. Gives us the background about how Geralt and Yennefer meet. We get more of Dandelion as well, and we meet a genie, and it's really quite an explosive story, if you will. And finally, the book concludes by returning to The Voice of Reason. We get a glimpse of Geralt's future, not a very nice glimpse, showing us how he is really quite a haunted man. Now, I want to start by talking about the language of the book, which actually kind of surprised me. I was surprised by several things in here, and one was the language. And at first, I really felt like it was quite unexpected. The tone for me was very unexpected. It's very folktale-like, actually. It's simple. The language is very simple, understated, maybe even a bit stilted at times. And I don't think this is because it's a translation. I have a lot of respect for someone who translates from one language to another. It's a very difficult task to reproduce the style. And I suspect that Danusia Stock did a very good job of that, actually. And I'm saying this because Sapkowski was obviously drawing from fairy tales. I alluded to a couple of those when describing the short stories. In fact, it's fair to say that it goes beyond allusion to parody at times. And he also incorporates a lot of monsters from Slavic myth and folklore. All of this serves to give the book a very whimsical and fairy tale-like aura. But the simplicity of the language can actually be a bit deceptive. Behind it is an extremely brilliant wit. I actually began to appreciate the book more and more as I understood the humor in it. And it even helped me to appreciate the language a bit more. The humor is actually quite brilliant, and once I started to laugh, I started to enjoy the book a lot more and to appreciate it. And I would say the humor is probably one of my favorite parts of it. And I also enjoyed what he does with the language. He has something in there called the Elder Speech. I'm a kind of a sucker for languages. And the Elder Speech is the language spoken by elves, and some of the characters like Geralt understand and can use the Elder Speech. It seems to have a very Celtic flavor to it. There's definitely some Welsh in there, I would say. I'm not sure if that's true in the Polish versions of the book or not, what the Elder Speech looks like there, but I really enjoyed the fact that it was, after you just kind of look at it for a bit, you realize, oh, that's actually kind of readable. I think I understand what that means. So that was a kind of a nice touch that I really enjoyed in there. Now, as far as the characters go, just like the prose seemed a bit simple to me, the characters felt a bit wooden at first, just like in folk tales and such. But I also think it's important to keep in mind that these are short stories. It's very difficult to do character development in short stories. Same is true, by the way, of the world building in here. I often found myself a bit lost in terms of the geography. There's no map that comes with the book either. So there are lots of mentions of different kingdoms here and there, and I had no idea really where anything was. So I might have liked a map. That might have been helpful. But I do expect, as the series continues, to get a better sense of the geography, the world building, and also, even more importantly for me, the characters. I believe that this is an introduction, some important background information on these characters. I'd like to see them developed a little more. So I'm going to reserve judgment on the character development for now, but I will say that the characters definitely did the job of making me feel invested in the story, and definitely I would love to read more. So let's talk a little bit about Geralt. He is a monster killer for hire. He's been chemically, magically transformed into quite a powerful warrior who heals quickly, can see in the dark, and has magical abilities, although not to the degree that a sorceress might have. Geralt is a legend among the Witchers, and he has an accumulation of myth around him. So he's supposedly without emotions, although clearly he does have emotions, and he seems to long for human relationships. It reminds me a little bit, this is probably going to date me here, but he reminds me a bit of the character Spock in Star Trek in that sense. He's a character who definitely has the potential for complexity and certainly a lot of inner conflict. And he lives by his own moral code in a world that has kind of deprived him of a moral code because of what he is. He has integrity, he has empathy, and he has some positive relationships, like his friendship with Dandelion or his relationship with Naneki. But his romantic life, although very busy, seems to be a bit of a wreck. As a Witcher, he is viewed by society at large as a necessary evil. Someone to be ostracized but called upon when needed to deal with some monster or other. So he is, in fact, despised, except by any beautiful woman that he happens to meet. It seems like every time a beautiful woman comes into the story, she finds a way to leap into bed with Geralt. Which leads me to the portrayal of women in the story. Now, I actually want to hold off on any judgment here. I can certainly see where you might see it as a bit old school. and in the portrayal of women as sex objects and as libidinous strumpets with crude references and sexual innuendos in terms of how they actually love kinky sex. There's a lot of, by the way, sexual content in the books, just be warned, although nothing extremely explicit. If you were going to put a positive spin on the portrayal of women, you might call them earthy. But sex, like everything else in here, is subject to the ubiquitous humor. I'm not really ready to christen Sapkowski the Benny Hill of fantasy just yet, though. For example, I definitely see the potential for complexity and agency in the character Yennefer, who is powerful and independent and is chaos embodied. Another strong female character is Neneke, who takes care of Geralt and puts up with absolutely no nonsense. She's a wonderful, one of my favorite characters actually in there. So I also definitely see signs that Sapkowski has a very positive view of women and their strength. And I'd be interested actually in your ideas about the portrayal of women in the Witcher stories, if you have comments to share on that as well. I also see some real great hints of thematic depth in this book, though it's skillfully hidden behind the humor and the simple prose. You know, Geralt's outsider status, for example, and his struggles to find his humanity, as well as relate to people who are the real monsters in these stories sometimes. Geralt himself puts it very well on page 215 of my edition of The Last Wish. He says people like to invent monsters and monstrosities. Then they seem less monstrous themselves. When they get blind drunk, cheat, steal, beat their wives, starve an old woman, when they kill a trapped fox with an axe, or riddle the last existing unicorn with arrows, they like to think that the Bane entering cottages at daybreak is more monstrous than they are. They feel better then. They find it easier to live. Geralt is a product of the society that despises him, a society that, as an outsider, he both understands too well and longs to join. Perhaps this is why he relates to the elves, whom the humans have displaced and stolen the land from. The elves who live on the margins of society, eking out an existence. So I definitely see some really great potential for theme in here, and I'm looking forward to seeing where Sapkowski takes that in the next short story collection and in the saga proper. I would say overall this is a very promising start that makes me very invested in reading some more. I'm definitely looking forward to getting further into these books by Sapkowski. I love the humor, and I think the characters have some great potential, so I'm really interested to see where he takes them. And I'm hoping to see some more of the world. I suspect that I'll get that. I bet that people who play the video games probably have a great sense of the world as well. And by the way, if you haven't seen it yet, I did a video in which one of my former students shows me how to play The Witcher 3 video game, in which he's my student, very patient with me, fortunately. So I'll put a link to that video in the description below if you're curious about that. Also, I want to remind you that this coming Tuesday, I'll be releasing the video for my 1,000 subscriber giveaway. If you haven't already replied with a comment to the video I left a few days ago explaining the giveaway, please feel free to go ahead. You have until Tuesday. There's a $50 Barnes & Noble gift card involved, so I hope that you will join in on that. And next Saturday, I hope to be releasing another review. This time I have started to read The Poppy War, a book that I've been meaning to read for a long time. So far, so good, so I'll be releasing a video on that, I hope, next Saturday, a week from today, and I very much hope you will join me for that. Until next time.